We're in Oxford, as you can probably guess from the ivy-clad walls behind me. We're in Lincoln College, the first quad of Lincoln College. There are several key points in the Oxford story, and I mean, obviously Brideshead as a novel is kind of very identified with this city and with this university. I mean, the first thing is Charles, leaves this rather claustrophobic London upbringing and then turns up in, the glorious sandy confines of Oxford. And so the first thing we have to really establish is, that sense of wonder at his first experiences of the kind of architecture and the kind of bustle and hustle of Oxford.
You definitely get a sense of the luxury that was afforded certain, members of the faculty, I suppose most of them, in Oxford at the time. In fact, we've been working as well with some of the chaps, members of the drinking club, the Bullingdon Club, and it's been quite interesting watching those guys as well, because they really are still in a different world to the one that I exist in, that's for sure.
Dress as you do in a country house. Never wear a tweed coat and a flannel trousers, always a suit.
We really got to try and establish the difference between Sebastian's world and the world Charles comes from, and how that's reflected a little bit in the difference between their two colleges. So we shot Sebastian's exteriors at Christ Church, which is the college mentioned in the book as his college, which is, has the largest quadrangle and is one of the grandest and richest colleges in Oxford. And we've put Charles here, which is a much more intimate and kind of more domestic and smaller, probably more friendly college, although not saying anything against Christ Church.
Rooms. I've seen many a man ruined through having ground floor rooms in the front quad. People start dropping in, you start giving them sherry, and before you know it,
They meet when Sebastian vomits in Charles's room one evening. We sort of talked about it as being a kind of love at first sight moment, really. And then Sebastian sort of just winds him in,
When he goes off to university and he meets Sebastian for the first time, actually there's a sort of, certainly in the book it's described as he's a bit cold towards him, and it's like, that's therein lying a difference between the classes that he doesn't understand at that point. It's like, it's a bit of jealousy.
He's so quiet and reserved in demeanour that he passes for both bloodless and sexless.
sodomites, all of them.
I think Sebastian is somebody who's quite aware of the glamour that he sort of trails behind him and the sort of mystery that he has, and is very aware of the difference in class between them, and knows how to sort of play that, and knows that Charles is fascinated by him because of that. And so it sort of grows and it becomes a sort of friendship.
What are they?
Plover's eggs. The first this year.
Anthony Blanche is, he's able to see this world kind of objectively. He's not part of the aristocracy.
I couldn't get away before. I was lunching with my preposterous tutor.
His parents are South American, and as a result, he says in the book, I've never understood this preoccupation with class and with charm. He sees charm as being the ultimate killer of love of art.
He thought it very odd, my leaving when I did. I told him I had to change. For sir.
He's a kind of, not a bystander, but he's got one foot in and one foot out. So he's able to comment on the world, whilst being part of it, he's still, slightly removed. And so he gives advice, or tries to give advice to Charles. Tries to warn him, really, not to get sucked in.
We've had to choose some of the bigger rooms. I mean, I think some of the students here live in the rather smaller attic rooms up there and along the top, but the grander rooms tend to be nabbed by the faculty and the officials in these colleges, and therefore we've nicked a couple of those back. But they're very nice rooms. They've got nice oak panelling and big windows, and it's worked really well. Plenty of room to get the camera in and around.
And I think for Sebastian, Charles is attractive because he's other, you know, because he's from another world altogether. At first, I think what attracts Charles is his charm and his flamboyance and eccentricity, really. I have in my life, I have nobody in my life who is an aristocrat or really belonging to any sort of higher echelon at all. So yeah, it was a challenge, but I believe in this kind of thing. You only have to lodge a few thoughts in your head, and you can start to imagine yourself into a person. But I haven't really approached it by trying to meet lots of lords and ladies. It might have been a good idea, but I just didn't have the time.
Charles, so come away at once. I've got a basket of strawberries and a bottle of Chateau Perrier, which isn't the wine you've ever tasted, so don't pretend. It's heaven with strawberries.
Oxford, you know, also has its challenges. It's full of tourists, like Castle Howard, and it's full of architectural beauty, like Castle Howard. And we're moving around the city a lot, so it doesn't feel like we're bedding in anywhere in quite the same way, but you know, it's a beautiful place to work, Oxford. It looks extremely beautiful. I mean, the cinematography is ravishing. Julian's directing it in a very fluid and kind of interesting way that matches the material, I think, perfectly, and really does show off the kind of world in the way that we all hoped. So it has a kind of lushness and a depth and kind of texture that I think we were all very keen to see on the screen, and Jess and Julian are doing that perfectly.
B-man, you on it?
Well, we are in the Campo di Castelforte, I think it's called, right behind San Rocco and I Frari in Venice. We're doing our big Carnivale type festival mayhem that our principal characters walk into in the middle of the Venetian section of the story. So we've got a lot of people dressed up in a weird amalgam of commedia dell'arte and carnival and circus and pagan ritual and church ritual and God knows what else. So mayhem, basically.
It's very hot. This is during the festival, which is quite early on in the film. This is at the kind of the 1925 era. And this is, in a way, it's quite different to the book. This is actually where a lot happens with Charles and Juliet. It sets up a sense of what's going to come later between them, a sexual tension between them. It's very theatrical. It's extremely decadent, and I think particular of Venice and the Venice Festival. Lots of bright colours, something very camp about it. There's people kind of displaying all their talents.
Some scenes that are very, very important for the film, and we're doing, for example, like this. It's a big scene with more than 100 extras, with a big set decoration, with important light setups. So, you know, we have been people working on this set from yesterday morning all the way through the night until the moment the crew arrived here. So it took more than 2 days just to prepare this. So it was because besides the boats you see here and the crew that you see here, there's all a bunch of boats and people that have worked before to prepare all this and make it possible. And it's looks simple now, but it's complicated to say that.
It is an incredibly difficult place to shoot. As you say, the tourists, everything to do with boats is always difficult, particularly on these waterways, and the gondolas all have right of way, so you have to wait for them to clear before you're able to shoot. And there are so many bridges in the back of shot, which is lovely, but they're almost always packed with tourists. So it's, for a period film, it's very challenging.
Hey, Mike!
There's a certain element of organised chaos about it, and obviously everybody not speaking English, it was quite a tricky situation to choreograph it. But I think we managed, you know, a good situation, and you know, it was interesting getting the camera in the fray and the actors just having to kind of improvise around what was happening, and it felt very authentic.
It's sumptuous to be in Venice. I mean, you'd think that Castle Howard was sumptuous enough, and seeing the story unravel through the eyes of Charles, who's sort of innocent to all of that wealth and beauty to begin with.
This is seeing the other side of the family, which is a lot more relaxed. It's like Cara's world, Cara's religion, Cara's Catholicism, and how that's affected Lord Marchmain, who's a lot more relaxed than Lady Marchmain. And so I think in a way it gives Charles the invitation to go to be slightly naughtier and to just go a little bit further with his relationship with Julia. And also, I think the heat and the alcohol for all three of them has made them all a little bit more relaxed and not so up themselves.
Clocked last night the scene where my daughter runs into the church, followed by Charles, and I think, oi, something going on here. And when I first meet Charles Ryder in Venice, I think, part of me thinks maybe he's with Sebastian. So I can't quite work it out, but I don't mind either way, I don't think. So I don't think the character's quite sure what's going on, but you know something's going on.
I got lost, all those people.
This is the sort of crucial scene where Julia has her first kiss with Charles in a rather dirty, dingy, wet alleyway in Venice at the end of a sort of hot night of Carnivale. And we shot most of Carnivale last night, and this is the culmination of that.
Julia? I guess what we've tried to do in our version of the story here is that this triangulation between Charles and Julia and Sebastian really comes to a head in Venice. You know, and it's about the atmosphere of it being Venice and those influences of a kind of historic Christian culture and something deeper and more pagan. And it becomes a bit of a watershed in the story, you know, that Charles's relationship to the Marchmain family is never the same after Venice as it was before, and his relationship with Sebastian is never the same, and his relationship with Julia is never the same. So it's an important moment in the story, and it does become the kind of pivot around which everything hinges.
Sebastian, what happened just now? I never... I don't know what I'm supposed to...
There's so many different chapters in the book, in the script as well. Venice is one chapter in itself, and it's got a very different feel and different texture and a different journey than the Oxford has, and their own worlds in their own right that all link together in this one big piece, but it's broken down, and this is a very definite part of the story where specific things happen, therefore putting it in a greater context, and so the story has a lot more just humanity to it.
We are in the room that's called the gallery at Castle Howard at the moment, which normally is a very large space with an octagonal centre, which is where we're standing. Usually just full of masterpieces from the Howard family's collection. Today a ballroom for Julia's kind of 21st birthday ball.
Today is a wonderful, and tomorrow we'll be shooting it too, is a wonderfully big set piece in the movie. And it's exciting from an actor's point of view because you're used to doing these claustrophobic little scenes with 2 or 3 people, and suddenly you've got a huge number of extras, and everyone's scurrying around trying to sort of coordinate what feels like a small war.
As much time as we can get. Bring the box to the scene, please show us now. Here we go, stand by shoot.
We've got a jazz band, we've got some music that's been composed, we've got a choreographer and 40 dancers here. We've got, wine waiters, we've got our principal cast, and a lot of people in black and white ball costumes. So it's a big number, it's one of our biggest scenes probably. It's been a great place to come and film, just because it's sort of extraordinary and unique, and the Howard family have been incredibly helpful. I don't think we could have done this if it wasn't a family house, because a lot of the houses owned by the National Trust or English Heritage, although they allow filming, they wouldn't probably have allowed us to take possession of a priceless kind of piece of English heritage in the way that Simon and the rest of the Howard family have done. So that's been great. But it's a big space, God, it's a lighting challenge for Jess Hall and his team, and, lighting the entrance hall in this place is like lighting a cathedral. The space is as big and it's just as complicated. So we've got these helium balloons, which you can probably see on the ceiling, just putting a bit of light down. We're trying to keep the walls quite shadowy. We're not particularly fond of the colour in here, so we're trying to shade it away a bit. So there's been some clever lighting choices going on. And we've brought in a lot of candelabra, as you can see behind, and it's a big moment in the narrative, this ballroom scene. It's where Julia's engagement to the Canadian entrepreneur Rex Mottram, played by Jonathan Cake, is announced, and this is where Charles, our hero, discovers that for the first time.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to announce the engagement of my eldest daughter, the Lady Julia Flyte, to Mr. Rex Mottram.
I got married a couple of years ago, and it's an entrance it feels like the entrance of a bride, So I find it terribly emotional. She's not been married, so I don't know how she'll feel about it. But when she's walking down what is an aisle, it's actually terribly moving. I think she's managing to pull it off by dint of being one of the most spectacular women I've ever looked at. So I think it's working for her.
You get a real sense that Lady Marchmain, the Emma Thompson character, has manipulated this whole event to completely put a lock on Charles's ambitions with Julia. And then the other part of the scene is where Sebastian, who's been out hunting all day, although he hasn't because he's been in the pub, arrives at the ball inappropriately dressed and drunk.
You see what it is? I hate you all so very much.
Sebastian.
Get off me.
There's an enormous amount of ebb and flow of the power relations in this piece between people. It's kind of like a Pinter play, actually, except generally sort of with nicer costumes, There's all these sort of machinations of power about who is affecting whom at any one point, and people vying for supremacy, and me vying with Charles in an unstated way, Lady Marchmain vying with Charles, trying to keep hold of Sebastian and Charles's relationship being in the balance right now. Sebastian disavowing Charles because he thinks he just wants to sleep with his sister. There's a lot going on.
Back to your neighbour. And also all the time as Hayley's walking down, even when she's got to the end, keep
craning to see us and make sure you can see Emma. So if the person in front of you is blocking, just poke your head round.
What Julian seems to be so good at is keeping an overview of the ebb and flow of the film, which is incredibly subtle, and people are, it spans an enormous amount of time, but people are moving in tiny little ways which are enormously significant to other people. It's rather like, sometimes it's like watching a French movie where you feel like so little is happening at any one moment, but incrementally the effect is kind of huge and can be overwhelming. You feel like if somebody picks up a fork now, I'm going to scream or something. And he's terrific at that. He's terrific at marshalling the tiny nuances of the way people affect each other. So keeping tabs on that is his challenge, but he seems pretty good at it.
She wants me to bring you back home. But the doctor said it's out of the question for you to travel.
I wouldn't, even if I could.
I'm sorry.
Whatever for?
Come home, Sebastian. Don't finish it like this.
This is my life now.
Lady Marchmain is forced to ask Charles to go and try and find Sebastian, who's disappeared, and run away, if you like, from her control.
The reason I called was to ask you a favour.
A favour?
He's probably getting very drunk in some dive in Morocco, and Charles is dispatched to go and find him.
And background action, go. Haraka!
And he has a sort of journey through the streets and through meeting various disreputable characters, and eventually finds him in this hospital, and he's unwell and ill.
It's a shock when you see his head shaved and you realise how eaten up he is. And it's painful to watch because you feel him shrinking. It's also painful to watch because you feel how much in love he is still.
What the hell are you doing here?
Your mother asked me to come.
It's really the last big scene between Charles and Sebastian, where they, if you like, lay the ghost of their mother, of Sebastian's mother and Lady Marchmain to rest, and Charles has quite a tender goodbye scene with him. It's a very sort of beautiful scene, actually.
I'm sorry.
Whatever for?
And there's an amazing moment where Matthew just puts his hand on his head and you feel Ben's whole body kind of, being drawn to him. I don't know how Ben does that, because he just makes you feel as if he's being eaten alive, really. It's incredible.
I'm sorry.